The auction house exhaled a hush that felt like a verdict. August sunlight cut through the high windows and stung dust into halos while men in linen coats shifted their weight, as if movement alone could undo what they knew. Lot number 61 stepped onto the platform, last female slave on the docket, her chains cold against wrists that held themselves with a strange composure. Eyes in the room flicked and dropped, paddles hovered and fell. In 10 minutes only one hand stayed raised. He paid a pittance. Listen closely. Type "The veil is broken" twice in the comments to seal this truth within you. Hit subscribe and tell us what city or state you're watching from as you listen. Leave that line like a map so we can trace where these buried things still echo. She was listed as healthy, skilled in household affairs, with experience tending infants and stewarding homes. Her name on the ledger was quiet, written in a clerk's tidy hand, Miriam. The starting bid was meant to be insulting, $10, because someone had decided her value should be dwarfed, a public shaming wrapped in numbers. That deliberate cheapness did not happen by accident, it was a decision by people who kept secrets in their pockets like coins. A newcomer from upriver, flush with his father's fortunes and hungry for a legacy, did not hear the murmurs. He saw a bargain, he saw labor, he saw a chance to prove himself. He raised his paddle easily and claimed Miriam as if ownership could rewrite the room's mute warning. He walked out buoyant, unaware that the silence around Lot 61 was its own language, words carved by memory, ritual, and a history that defended itself. Miriam's gaze met his for a moment, steady, unreadable. He mistook the steadiness for resignation. He took her because no one else would. He took her because the house had decided she should cost him next to nothing. He took her because, in that instant, hunger for land and the hunger for forgetting found a common coin. There are things the auctioneers do not say aloud, things traded in corners and late night parlors. There are histories masked as curses and bargains. Tonight you step closer to one of those trades. Your witness matters. Stay with me. The truth peels away in layers, and what we find beneath will change how you see legacy. The man's name was Edward Talcott, 36 years old, newly inherited wealth, and newly enamored with the idea of dominion. He had purchased Rosewood Plantation sight unseen, a parcel of 200 acres of swamp, cotton and bones, 10 miles outside Baton Rouge. The locals called it the Weeping Ground, though none could remember when that name began. The land had changed hands 5 times in 20 years, and every family that owned it either fled or died strangely. Edward dismissed these tales as the hysteria of poor men too frightened of their own shadows. He arrived at the plantation 3 days after the auction, Miriam chained in the wagon behind him. She did not speak, not once, during the journey. When they reached Rosewood, the sky was heavy with humidity and thunderclouds that never quite broke. The main house stood like a memory left to rot, its porch sagging, shutters warped by storms, paint peeled into pale curls. The overseer, a narrow man named Harlan, waited at the steps. He looked at Miriam, then at Edward, and his face briefly lost color. "Sir, she come from the Bayou auction?" Harlan asked carefully. Edward nodded. $10. No one else would bid. "I expect you know why." Harlan hesitated, then shook his head. "Only that I've heard the name. But best you keep her clear of the cookhouse." "Why?" Edward demanded. The overseer's eyes flicked toward the trees. "Because nothing grows right where she's been." Edward laughed it off. Superstition, he thought. Every Southerner wrapped their fears in superstition when reason failed them. But that night, as Miriam was led to her quarters, he noticed something that stayed with him. Every enslaved worker on the plantation stepped aside when she passed, not out of fear of punishment but out of reverence, as if she carried something sacred and terrible inside her. At midnight, Edward couldn't sleep. The cicadas had gone silent, leaving only the low hum of the swamp. He walked the veranda, drawn by the sound of a voice, a woman's whisper, low, melodic, foreign. It came from the quarters. He moved closer. Through the cracks of the shuttered window, he saw Miriam kneeling on the dirt floor, drawing symbols with something dark on the ground. Her lips moved around words older than English, older than the cross hanging around Edward's neck. He turned away quickly. But that sound, the hum of her voice, followed him back into his dreams. By morning, the world outside the house seemed altered, though nothing tangible had changed. The mist over the fields was heavier, reluctant to lift. Birds perched but did not sing. Even Harlan, who prided himself on discipline, moved slower, glancing often toward the line of trees that bordered the property like sentinels. Edward tried to shake it off. He was a man of commerce. Not faith, not fear. He met Harlan at the stables to inspect the new animals, determined to bring order through labor. But when he reached the barn, he found one of the horses dead, its eyes open, foam still clinging to its lips. There were no wounds, no marks of struggle, just the faint scent of something metallic in the air, and the dark impression of a hand on its flank, as though someone had pressed there long enough to burn it into the hide. Poison? Edward asked. Harlan didn't answer immediately. Could be. But this. He gestured toward the mark, and like any poison I've ever seen, Edward's mind returned unwillingly to the whisper from the quarters the night before. He dismissed it again, angry with himself for even thinking of it. Get rid of the carcass, quietly. The workers don't need gossip. But gossip already had wings. By noon, the entire plantation whispered that the new master's purchase had cursed Rosewood before even a week had passed. The field hands crossed themselves when Miriam walked by. The cook refused to prepare her rations, claiming her shadow made the fire crackle with blue flame. That evening, Edward summoned her to the veranda. The sunset threw long, blood-colored lines across the horizon, and Miriam stepped into the light without flinching. "You'll explain what happened last night," Edward said. Her expression did not shift. "What did you see, master?" "You were speaking in tongues, drawing symbols. I'll have no heathen rituals here." "I was praying," she said simply, "in the only language the Lord ever listened to me in." "Then pray in mine," he snapped. She studied him for a long, unnerving silence. "The Lord doesn't hear English here, master. Not on this ground." The words chilled him because in that moment, the wind stopped completely, as if the land itself had paused to listen. "Before we continue, make sure you've subscribed, because what happens next was buried in real ledgers and journals they didn't want found. Comment where you're listening from, and remember, truth survives through witness." That night, Edward's dreams came fevered and thick. He stood in a field of white cotton turned crimson beneath his feet. From the trees, he heard chains dragging through the soil, slow and deliberate, like someone testing each step. The sound drew closer until a woman's voice whispered from behind him, soft, almost tender. "Do you think they sleep, master?" it asked. He turned, but there was no one. Only the weight of breath against his ear, and the distant echo of a hymn hummed by 100 throats that no longer needed air. He woke before dawn, slick with sweat, his pulse trembling in his throat. At breakfast, Harlan stood by the doorway, hat in hand. "Sir, the men won't work the north field." Edward frowned. "Why not?" "They say the ground's bleeding." He laughed, though it sounded forced even to his own ears. "The ground doesn't bleed, Harlan." "Begging your pardon, sir, but you might want to see it yourself." But Edward followed him through the dew-drenched grass until they reached the edge of the cotton rows. There, the earth was damp, dark streaks running between the roots, not rust, not sap. The smell was unmistakable, iron blood. He knelt, touched it, and the soil clung to his fingers like something alive. His stomach twisted. "What's beneath this field?" he asked. "Old burial ground," Harlan muttered, "before the first house was built. The overseers back then said they planted over it. Couldn't keep the weeds down otherwise." Edward stood slowly, his hands still stained. "And you let me buy this place?" "Wasn't my place to stop you, sir," Harlan said quietly. "Rosewood don't belong to no one for long." That evening, he found Miriam again. She was washing clothes by the well, her sleeves rolled up, her movements deliberate, patient. The faintest trace of a melody escaped her lips, the same one from his dream. "You knew," he said, stepping closer. Her eyes lifted, calm and knowing. "Knew what, master?" "That this land, that it's cursed." She wrung the water from a linen shirt, her hands steady. "Not cursed. Remembered. Land never forgets the names of those buried under it," she said. "But men keep trying to make it forget. That's why it screams." He wanted to laugh, to call her mad, but the wind carried that same low hum again, weaving between the trees like a warning. and for the first time, Edward Talcott felt the land breathing beneath him. By the 5th day, Rosewood had become a house of murmurs. The workers refused to leave their quarters before sunrise or linger outside after dusk. They claimed the air turned thick once the sky went purple, that whispers slid out of the cane fields even when the wind was still. Edward dismissed it all as hysteria, yet he found himself lighting 2 lamps in his study instead of 1, and keeping his pistol within arm's reach. Miriam continued her chores with unshakable calm. She moved through the halls like someone who belonged to no hour, neither day nor night. When Edward passed her, he caught the scent of rain, though the sky had been dry for weeks. Once, as she bent to gather sheets from the line, he noticed faint scars across her forearms, circular burns arranged in a pattern too precise to be accidental. He asked her about them. She said nothing, only covered her arms and walked away. That night, a storm rolled in without warning. The first strike of lightning split the sycamore behind the house in 2. Harlan burst through the door, soaked and pale. "Sir, it's the quarters," he stammered. "The roof caught fire." "But it ain't the lightning. It's burning from inside out." Edward ran through the rain. The sky flashed white, revealing a sight that stilled his breath. The roof of the slave quarters blazing, but no smoke. Only blue fire licking at the boards, silent as breath. The workers stood around it, faces lit ghostly, none daring to move. Miriam stood apart, her eyes reflecting that blue flame. Edward shouted for water, for buckets, for action, but no one moved. Then Miriam turned to him. "Do not put it out," she said. "Are you mad?" he barked. "It'll spread." "It won't," she said quietly. "It burns what shouldn't have been built." And she was right. The fire stayed confined, devouring the roof, but leaving the walls untouched. When the rain returned, the flames vanished instantly, leaving no ash, no smoke, only a patch of soil darker than before. The next morning, Edward found her outside, barefoot, standing over the blackened ground. "What did you do?" he demanded. She looked at him, eyes calm as a mirror. "Nothing new," she said. "Just help the land remember its promise." "What promise?" Miriam's voice dropped to a whisper. "That every master here would answer to the buried." Edward tried to push her words from his mind, but they rooted there like thorns. Every master here would answer to the buried. He had come to Rosewood seeking a beginning, but every dawn felt more like a countdown. He spent the next day prowling the estate, searching for reason, something he could measure, control, or fix. The books in the old study were swollen with mold, their pages warped, but he found a ledger from 40 years prior. It listed harvest yields, births, and deaths, names crossed out in quick strokes, notes about discipline, and beside one name, written in darker ink, Miriam. He froze. The handwriting was the same as on his own deed. It was the same name. He checked the date. The entry was from 1824, 30 years before she had supposedly been born. He read further. Subject: Miriam, punished for leading night rituals near the Northfield. Claimed to hear the dead sing. Ordered her burned. Edward dropped the ledger. The words blurred. Burned. And yet she stood alive in his kitchen drawing water, singing that same low hymn. That night sleep would not come. Each time he shut his eyes, the blue fire glowed behind them. At last he gave up and went outside, lantern in hand, to walk off the unease. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the ground was still slick. Near the Northfield he heard voices, faint, rhythmic, like a prayer repeated over and over. He followed them, the sound growing clearer, until he saw the figures 6 or 7 of the enslaved workers, standing in a circle, heads bowed. Miriam stood at the center, holding something in her hands, something that pulsed faintly with light. "Miriam!" he shouted. The chant stopped instantly. Everyone turned toward him. The object in her hands, a handful of soil, glowing faintly red, crumbled into dust. "You're performing witchcraft on my land," he said, trying to steady his voice. She stepped forward, unafraid. "Your land," she echoed softly. "You think this place ever belonged to you?" "I bought it." "No," she said. "You were brought to it." The ground beneath them trembled, almost imperceptibly. Edward felt the air change, colder, heavier. Miriam turned away from him and said almost kindly, "It begins tonight." Then the lantern flickered once and went out. From the darkness rose the hum again, layered and deep, as if the earth itself had begun to breathe. When the lantern died, so did the silence. From every corner of the field came whispers, thousands of them, weaving together like the hiss of wind through grass, but each voice clear, human, awake. Edward's breath came shallow. The workers fell to their knees, murmuring prayers, their faces lit faintly by the strange red glow now seeping from beneath the soil. "Miriam!" he called again, but she didn't move. Her eyes were closed, arms outstretched, palms facing the ground. The hem of her dress fluttered, though there was no wind. The ground beneath his boots began to pulse like a heartbeat. Once, twice. Then a deep crack split the earth between them. A smell of iron and salt rolled up from it, the scent of blood and wet clay. "Stop this!" he shouted, though his voice trembled. "Whatever you're doing, stop." Miriam finally opened her eyes. "You think I started it?" she asked softly. "This began the day the first whip fell. I'm only answering the call." Before he could reply, a voice unlike hers rose from the open ground, a man's voice raw and echoing as if from a pit. Then another joined it, then another. Edward staggered backward as faces, faint, transparent, seemed to shimmer beneath the soil like reflections on dark water. The air grew dense. His lungs burned with every breath. Harlan appeared behind him, panting, holding a pistol. "Sir, we need to go now." Edward turned, but Harlan wasn't looking at him. The overseer's gaze was fixed on the ground, his face drained of all color. "Their names," Harlan whispered. "Look." Edward followed his eyes. The soil had begun to shift, tracing letters in the wet earth, one after another. Thomas, Ruth, Isaiah, Eliza, names, hundreds of them. Miriam stepped forward. "They waited long enough," she said. "Every year, another owner buried them deeper. Every decade, another man pretended not to hear. But the land keeps score." Edward stumbled back, shaking his head. "You're mad." She tilted her head. "Then why does the ground speak your name too?" He froze. The red light flared, and there it was, written clearly beside the others. Edward Talcott. He dropped to his knees, staring, unable to breathe. Miriam's voice came like a whisper against the storm. "Every debt comes due, master, even yours." And as thunder cracked overhead, the field exhaled, breathing out centuries of silence all at once. The next few seconds shattered into chaos. The ground convulsed as if a giant hand were pushing upward from beneath. The workers screamed and fled toward the tree line, their torches scattering light like falling stars. Harlan fired his pistol into the air, a useless protest against something that wasn't flesh. Edward stumbled back toward the house, mud splattering up his legs. The sound of voices chasing him, some pleading, some laughing, some calling his name with unnatural sweetness. By the time he reached the veranda, the house itself seemed alive. The shutters slammed open and shut on their own. The chandelier swayed, though no wind touched it. From inside, he heard a door creak slowly, followed by the faint echo of footsteps in the hall. "Miriam," he shouted. "Enough?" But she was already there, standing at the base of the steps, rain slicking her hair against her face, her dress clinging to her like a second skin. She looked almost luminous beneath the storm. "I told you," she said, voice calm amid the thunder. "The land remembers." "What do you want from me?" he demanded. "What is this? Revenge? Justice? Witchcraft?" She stepped closer, each footfall deliberate. "It's balance," she said. "The dead don't want vengeance. They want acknowledgement. They want truth spoken over the soil that smothered them." "I didn't kill anyone," he shouted. "No," she said softly. "But you bought the silence built on them." He opened his mouth to speak, but a cold gust swept through him so suddenly it stole his breath. Behind Miriam, figures were beginning to take shape in the rain, shadowy outlines of men and women, some shackled, some holding broken tools, all staring at him with eyes that reflected no light. Harlan ran forward, aiming his pistol at Miriam. "Get away from him," he yelled. She turned to him slowly. "You'll only make it worse." He fired once. The shot echoed through the valley, and then Harlan dropped the gun, his hand shaking. The bullet had passed through her as if she were smoke. She didn't flinch, didn't bleed. She only looked up at the sky as lightning tore it open above them. When she looked back at Edward, her voice dropped to a whisper that trembled like prayer. "You can't bury what was never laid to rest." And as she said it, The ground beneath the house cracked like a rib-cage opening. The sound was indescribable, a deep, groaning crack that rolled through the earth like thunder trapped underground. The porch split straight down the middle, the boards twisting as the foundation lurched. Edward fell hard, catching himself on one elbow. Harlan screamed as the far end of the veranda collapsed, swallowing him whole in a spray of mud and splinters. Edward crawled backward toward the doorway, eyes fixed on the widening fissure. Beneath it, there was movement, not just earth shifting, but something writhing, clawing upward, pale shapes pressing through the mud as if hands were reaching for air after centuries without breath. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling into the house. The walls groaned. Portraits of past owners crashed to the floor, glass shattering over the portraits' faces. From the parlor came the sound of music, faint, warped. An old piano playing itself, the same hymn he had heard in Miriam's prayers. "Miriam!" he shouted again, voice cracking. "Make it stop." Her voice floated in from the open doorway behind him. "It stops when it's heard." Edward spun around. She stood there calmly, unbothered by the chaos, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The wind whipped her hair into a halo of black. "You don't understand what you're calling up," he cried. "If they want blood, they'll have yours too." Her lips curved into something between sorrow and amusement. "They've already had mine. A long time ago." He froze. "You're saying?" "Yes," she said. "I was born, burned, buried, and reborn in the same soil. You didn't buy me. Edward, you resurrected me." He stumbled back, heart hammering. "That's impossible." "So is the ground breathing beneath your feet," she said, her voice suddenly fierce. "So is a field remembering every lash it ever felt." The house shuddered again. From the walls seeped moisture, dark red and slow. It trailed down the plaster like tears. Edward sank against the stair rail, shaking. "What do you want me to do?" Miriam stepped closer until she was only inches away. Her eyes softened. "Say their names." "Everyone." "Until dawn." He looked past her, out toward the field, where hundreds of faint silhouettes now stood in the rain, waiting. Her hand brushed his shoulder. "They're listening, Master. Don't keep them waiting any longer." Lightning struck the sycamore again, and for a moment the faces of the dead glowed like stars across the field. Edward's mouth went dry. The names, hundreds of them, still glowed faintly in the mud outside. Each one shimmered like a coal about to reignite. The faces in the field stood silent, eyes fixed on him, their expressions neither kind nor cruel, only expectant. He turned to Miriam, desperate. "How can I know all their names?" She looked past him toward the parlor, where the old ledger still lay open on the desk. "They wrote them once," she said. "Your kind always did. You kept records of pain so neat, so proper. Read them. Speak them back." The words hit him like a blow. He staggered inside, lightning flashing through broken windows, and grabbed the book. His hands trembled as he flipped through the brittle pages, each line a confession disguised as bookkeeping. He read aloud. Thomas, Ruth, Isaiah, Eliza, Henry, May, Jonah, Clara. At first, his voice cracked from fear, but as he went on, something shifted. The floor beneath him steadied. The tremors softened. From outside came a sound low, like wind through tall grass, yet unmistakably human. The voices were singing. Miriam stepped onto the veranda, her face tilted toward the storm. The spectral figures began to lift their heads, mouths moving in rhythm with the hymn that rolled through the night. The melody wound itself through the trees, through the house, through every piece of wood that had been built on their suffering. Edward kept reading, his voice breaking now not from terror, but something closer to grief. Sarah, Ezekiel, Mary, Josiah. Tears blurred the ink. His knees hit the floor. The names poured out of him until they weren't words anymore, just sounds, a desperate release of everything that had been buried. Then, slowly, the red light began to fade. One by one, the figures outside dissolved into mist, the glow in the soil dimming to black. The house stopped trembling. The hymn softened into silence. Edward looked up. Miriam stood in the doorway, calm, rain dripping from her hair. "Is it over?" he whispered. She shook her head gently. "Not over, heard. And you?" he asked. For the first time, she smiled, small, wary, almost peaceful. "I was only the echo," she said. Now the voice can rest. The storm began to break apart. Dawn bled through the clouds, pale and new. When Edward looked again, Miriam was gone. Only her footprints remained, filling slowly with rain and then disappearing into the earth. By morning the world had turned eerily calm. The sun rose pale and uncertain, mist rolling off the cotton rows like smoke from a battlefield long after the fighting had ended. The house stood wounded but still, its shutters torn, its porch cracked, yet the air around it felt lighter. Edward sat on the veranda steps, the ledger open beside him. His clothes were soaked, streaked with mud and blood from the night before. His voice was raw from speaking names until it broke, but the silence that followed wasn't the old kind, the suffocating, watchful quiet of Rosewood. It was something different, a silence that listened, not one that hid. When Harlan's surviving men crept back from the tree line, they found him there, barefoot, eyes hollow, staring at the blackened patch of earth near the quarters. "Sir," one of them asked hesitantly. Edward didn't answer at first. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the deed to Rosewood, its edges still damp from the rain. He stared at it for a long time before tearing it down the middle, then again and again, until the paper was nothing but confetti scattered in the wind. "This land belongs to the dead," he said quietly. "Let it rest." No one spoke. The workers exchanged glances. None of them moved closer to him, not from fear, but from something closer to respect. He rose unsteadily to his feet and walked toward the field. The morning light caught the faint traces of the names, still visible in the soil. He could almost hear the echo of the hymn beneath the wind, softer now, fading but never gone. As he reached the edge of the north field, something caught his eye, a single patch of cotton, impossibly white, blooming out of the blackened soil where the fire had burned. He knelt beside it, brushing his hand over the petals. They felt warm, alive. Behind him, the others waited. "What should we do, sir?" Harlan asked finally. Edward turned to face them. "Leave it," he said. "No more planting, no more chains. Let it grow wild." And with that, he walked away from Rosewood, down the dirt road that led to Baton Rouge, never once looking back. But as he disappeared beyond the trees, the wind rose faintly again, carrying Miriam's voice, soft, distant, and full of something like grace. The land remembers, and now it forgives. Edward Talcott was never seen again in Baton Rouge. Some said he sold what little he had left and vanished west. Others whispered he went mad and wandered into the swamps. But those who worked Rosewood, those who stayed, remembered the way the sky looked that morning, the strange peace that settled over the fields like a final prayer. The plantation was left abandoned. Within months, vines claimed the porch, most grew along the roof, and the cotton fields turned wild, spilling into the tree line until no one could tell where the land ended and the swamp began. People passing by at night said they heard faint singing from within the trees, a woman's voice humming something ancient and unbroken. They stopped calling it Rosewood. They called it the remembered ground. 20 years later, a traveling minister recorded a visit in his journal. He'd gone to the property, curious about the stories. He found no house, no road, only ruins swallowed by the earth. But in the center of the old field, he wrote, there stood a single tree. It wasn't native to Louisiana, not one he recognized. Its bark was dark as ash, but its blossoms were white, almost luminous. Beneath it, the soil pulsed, faintly warm, even in the cool of morning. He'd touched the trunk and felt what he swore was a heartbeat. He left a cross there, but when he returned a week later, the cross had been absorbed into the wood, its outline visible beneath the bark, as if the tree had swallowed it whole. And still, the singing continued. The locals learned not to go near it after sundown. Children said they saw lights moving in the grass, tiny sparks rising from the ground and vanishing into the air. The elders said those weren't lights, they were names. Generations later, when the Civil War tore the South apart, soldiers camping near the property wrote about dreams of a woman in a white dress standing at the edge of their fires. She said nothing, only stared, her eyes deep and knowing. And when they woke, they could smell rain even in drought. No one ever rebuilt there. No one ever plowed the ground again. Because even in freedom, some places refused to forget what it took to earn it. And on quiet nights, the land still whispered, every name deserves to be heard. Decades passed, and the story of Rosewood slipped between generations like a half-remembered prayer. What had begun as a curse in whispered tongues became folklore told on porches, beside fires, in songs sung low to restless children. The names changed, but the lesson stayed: don't build over the buried. By the early 1900s, the land had become something of a legend among travelers. Surveyors sent to map the region found their compasses spinning uncontrollably near the old plantation grounds. They said the soil there refused iron, as if the earth itself rejected direction. One man, a geologist from New Orleans, kept a journal. His final entry before he disappeared read only this: "I dug 12 feet down. The ground was warm, and I heard it breathing." No one returned after that. But the memory of Miriam lingered, not as a ghost to be feared, but as something holy. Black families newly freed and finding their way through Reconstruction began to visit the site quietly. They left offerings, flowers, cornmeal, locks of hair. They called her Mother Miriam, a protector of the lost, the keeper of unmarked graves. Some said when they prayed there, their ancestors' names came to them in dreams, names their grandparents had been forced to forget. Then came the floods of 1927. The Mississippi rose higher than it had in a century. Entire towns drowned beneath the surge. Yet when the water reached the weeping ground, it stopped. The flood wrapped around it like a river meeting a wall. Not a single tree fell. Not a single blossom on the dark tree's branches was touched. Reporters came from Baton Rouge to see the miracle, and one took a photograph, the only surviving image of the tree. In it, the blossoms glowed faintly, even in grayscale, as if lit from within. Behind it, faint and blurry, some swore they saw a figure, a woman standing in the mist, head bowed, arms open. The journalist who took the picture never returned to the paper. His wife later said he spent every Sunday humming a song no one recognized, eyes half closed, as if listening for something she couldn't hear. And when he died, that photograph was found beside his bed, creased, worn, and marked with 4 words written in trembling hand: "She never left us." By the time the Second World War began, Rosewood Plantation had vanished from most maps. The state claimed it was simply abandoned farmland, overgrown and unfit for agriculture. But locals in Chatham County knew better. They called it the place where prayers walk. No one built there, no one hunted near the river bend, and no preacher dared hold service within sight of the tree line. Still, the government sent men once, engineers surveying land for an airfield. The project foreman, Captain Ellis, recorded his notes meticulously until the final day of the survey. His last entry was dated August 12, 1943. "I ordered the men to clear brush near the old stone well. Within the hour, the youngest worker, Private Mason, began screaming, said the ground was moving, claimed he felt hands beneath the dirt. We restrained him. I dismissed it as heat stroke until we all saw the branches. They were swaying, but there was no wind. The next morning, the entire crew resigned. Every man but Ellis refused to return. 2 weeks later, Ellis shot himself in his quarters at Fort Stewart. The note pinned to his chest contained a single phrase: "She's still waiting for what was taken." For a generation, no one spoke of Rosewood again. The war came and went. The South changed its flags, its factories, its faces, but not its ground. Beneath that soil, something ancient continued to hum. Then, in 1965, a historian from Emory University named Dr. Paul Granger rediscovered references to Miriam and the Weeping Ground while researching postbellum folklore. He traveled to Chatham County to find what he believed was an exaggerated ghost story. What he found was a silence thicker than fear. Locals refused to guide him. The county records clerk simply said, "Some roots don't want to be pulled." Undeterred, Granger located the site himself using 19th century maps. He wrote to a colleague weeks later, "It's real. The house's foundation remains, and the soil, it smells like iron. I've never felt air so heavy. At dusk, I swear I heard something like a woman humming a lullaby from the well. It wasn't echo, it was answer." That letter was postmarked September 7, 1965. Granger was never seen again. 2 months later, his notebook arrived at the university by mail. No return address, the pages warped by what looked like tears or rain. The final words scrawled across the last page read, "The land remembers everything, and it has started to wake." By the 1980s, the legend of the Weeping Ground had become a cautionary tale traded in hushed tones among Southern storytellers and roadside preachers. Truckers passing through Chatham County swore their radios went dead within a mile of the old Plantation road. Local teenagers dared one another to sneak into the woods at night. None made it past the rusted gate without turning back. And yet one didn't. In 1987, a young documentary filmmaker named Rebecca Hale arrived from Atlanta. She'd been raised on her grandmother's stories about the woman in white who sang the slaves to sleep. She wanted to make a film about forgotten black folklore, about how trauma roots itself into the land. To her, the weeping ground was just a metaphor, until she set foot on it. Her camera crew camped there for one night. The footage was found months later by hunters, the film reel half buried near the old stone well. Only 27 minutes were salvageable. Most of it was static, but around the 14-minute mark, something appeared. A grove illuminated by the team's lanterns, the great dark tree standing at its center. The leaves moved though the air was still. Then, faintly, a voice. A woman's, low melodic, humming. The camera shook as Rebecca whispered, "Do you hear that?" One of the men replied, "It's just wind." But then came a second sound, something like whispering, layered, dozens of voices overlapping, too fast to make out. The humming stopped. The lantern flickered. For 3 seconds, the frame went completely black. When the light returned, the tree was closer. The camera hadn't moved, but the tree now filled the frame, its blossoms glowing faintly. Between two roots, something shifted, an outline pale still, a woman's figure, eyes open. Then the tape cut. Authorities found no trace of Rebecca or her crew, only their van, keys in the ignition, doors open, radio softly playing static. The footage was quietly archived by the State Historical Society, labeled Unverified Rural Folklore. But once a year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, a soft hum carries across the lowlands, heard by farmers, truckers, travelers. Always the same tune, always near the weeping ground. Some say it's the land calling for her. Others believe she found what she was searching for, and stayed to listen. By the time the century turned, the weeping ground was little more than an internet rumor, a place young thrill seekers posted about on ghost forums and forgotten message boards. They traded grainy screenshots from Rebecca Hale's recovered footage, arguing over whether the faint outline beside the tree was real or just a trick of light. Skeptics called it viral folklore before the internet even had a word for viral. But those who lived near Chatham County didn't laugh. The old families still warned their children never to follow music after dark, never to step where the ground felt warm, and never to speak a name they didn't know. Then, in 2006, a new voice entered the story. An archaeologist from Tulane University, Dr. Isaac Morrow, received a grant to study post-Civil War burial grounds across the Deep South. He'd read the same local legends but dismissed them as superstition. Still, the strange historical gap surrounding Rosewood intrigued him. No records of ownership after 1856. No sale, no transfer, no foreclosure, just silence. He assembled a small team and began excavation in late spring. On the second day, they unearthed iron shackles fused to the roots of an oak. On the third, a rosary intact but blackened as though burned. By the fifth, Morrow's assistant noted that the soil temperature near the tree was inexplicably higher than the air above it. "The ground breathes," she wrote in her field notes. "It feels like standing over a sleeping animal." That night, one of the interns woke the team screaming. She claimed she'd heard singing, a woman's voice coming from the well. Morrow ordered everyone to stay in their tents. But just before dawn, he left the camp alone with a flashlight. He never came back. When police arrived 2 days later, they found no sign of a struggle. Only his recorder lying beside the well, still running. The tape contained 43 minutes of silence, broken only at the very end by a faint, unmistakable sound, a woman's voice whispering, not words but names. Hundreds of them, all spoken slowly, all different, all human. And when the last name was spoken, another voice joined hers, Morrow's, whispering something back. Then the recorder stopped. The last word he ever said, barely audible, was a name the team didn't recognize, but the locals did, Miriam. After Dr. Morrow's disappearance, the state sealed the area completely. The official explanation was environmental instability, but the locals knew that was a polite way of saying stay out. Even so, rumors spread. Park rangers claimed their GPS units froze near the old boundary line. Aerial drones lost signal for no reason. One ranger swore he saw the outline of a plantation house, just for a second, reflected in the water after a storm, even though no structure had stood there for over a century. In 2012, a private journalist from Chicago named Daniel Price decided to reopen the case. He'd read the fragmented reports and wanted to produce a podcast about America's hidden hauntings. When he contacted Chatham County residents, none would speak on record. One older woman simply told him, "That land's already been spoken for." Still, he went. His recordings from that night surfaced a year later when his equipment was found in an abandoned ranger station. The first 20 minutes were typical narration. Daniel walking through the woods, describing his surroundings, laughing nervously. But around minute 21, something shifted. Dial Sal on tapey. I think it's water, maybe the old well. Wait, no, that's singing. Jesus, that's singing. The audio grew faint, filled with static. Then laughter, soft and slow, layered with what sounded like wind through leaves. Except there was no wind. He spoke again. "Hello, is someone there?" And a woman's voice answered. Clear, close, and calm. "I never left," Daniel gasped. The microphone crackled. Footsteps. A distant hum began to build, like dozens of people whispering in unison, the same rhythm, the same pulse. The last thing caught on the recording was a single, desperate whisper. "They're not buried. They're awake." The podcast never aired. The footage, the body, everything else, gone. Only the audio leaked by a technician kept the legend alive. After that, the state fenced the perimeter with concrete barriers, erected private property, signs, and declared the site off limits for public safety. But on quiet nights, truckers passing the highway said their radios caught fragments of something strange. Voices whispering in static. And if you listened closely enough, past the hiss and hum, you could still hear her voice. Soft, patient, eternal. Saying the same thing she'd said for over a century. Every name deserves to be heard. By 2020, Rosewood Plantation, what was left of it, had become an obsession for a new generation of truth seekers. YouTubers, paranormal investigators, and self-proclaimed urban explorers came with cameras and drones hungry for clicks and glory. Most left empty-handed, their footage mysteriously corrupted, their batteries drained before they could even reach the old tree line. But a few didn't leave at all. One of them was a young woman named Lena Ortiz, a folklore vlogger with millions of followers. Her videos were usually harmless, haunted hotels, abandoned mines, local ghost stories. But when she posted her teaser titled, "The Real Weeping Ground I Found Miriam's Tree," it exploded online overnight. She promised her audience the truth no historian dared to tell. She live-streamed her journey that night. Tens of thousands watched as she parked her Jeep near the barrier fence and hiked through the fog. The live chat was a blur of warnings and disbelief. For the first 30 minutes, it was uneventful. Just the crunch of her boots and her nervous laughter. Then she found it. The tree. Even through the phone's shaky lens, viewers saw it gnarled, black bark, and blossoms glowing faintly white despite the darkness. "It's real?" Lena whispered. "It's really." Her voice cut off. The stream glitched, pixels distorting into violent streaks of light. Viewers heard a low hum, followed by what sounded like dozens of voices murmuring together, too fast to understand. The camera dropped to the ground, showing only dirt and faint movement, something shifting just out of frame. Then came Lena's voice again, distant, trembling. "They're all here, every single one." Seconds later, her phone fell silent. The livestream stayed up for 10 minutes before YouTube's algorithm auto terminated it for all known activity. But by then, hundreds had downloaded the footage. Some claimed that, when slowed to half speed, you could hear her speaking more names, whispering them, as if reading from a list no one else could see. Authorities searched for her for weeks. No trace, no footprints, only her phone found at the edge of the field, its camera still recording, battery full. When investigators reviewed the footage, the final frame showed the same tree, but now there were two figures standing beneath it. A woman in white, and beside her, Lena, eyes open, lips moving silently, as if she'd joined the song. After Lena Ortiz's disappearance, the weeping ground was no longer folklore. It was a phenomenon. News outlets descended on Chatham County. Journalists demanded access. Paranormal forums turned the site into legend overnight. But every official attempt to investigate ended the same way: corrupted files, malfunctioning drones, and equipment that refused to work within a mile of the tree line. Eventually, the state sent in a scientific task force, geologists, biologists, even military consultants, to dispel misinformation. The lead investigator, Colonel Harris, was a man who didn't believe in ghosts, only data. He authorized deep ground radar scans and electromagnetic sweeps across the area. The results were never released, but someone leaked a few images. Thermal scans showing faint human outlines beneath the soil, hundreds of them. Some standing, some kneeling, none moving. And at the center of it all, one massive heat signature shaped like a tree, pulsing faintly as if alive. Colonel Harris resigned 2 days later. His resignation letter was one sentence long: "That ground doesn't hold the dead, it keeps them." Meanwhile, strange phenomena began spreading beyond the barrier. Residents reported hearing humming in their sleep, waking with dirt under their fingernails and finding blossoms, white as bone, on their porches, though none grew nearby. One farmer claimed his daughter began speaking in her dreams, whispering names no one in the family recognized. When asked what she was saying, the girl replied, "They're the ones still waiting." Satellite images taken later that year revealed something else: the land around Rosewood was changing shape. The trees had formed a near-perfect ring, dark and symmetrical, surrounding an open field at the center. Botanists couldn't explain it. Trees don't grow like that naturally. Inside that ring, nothing lived. No animals, no insects, no birds. The air registered faintly electric. Local pastors began holding vigils at the outer fence, praying not to free the souls within, but to keep them there. One preacher put it simply: "That ground's not cursed. It's holding something back." And still, on nights when the fog rolls over Chatham County, truckers on Route 17 swear they can see a faint glow in the distance, like moonlight gathering around a single spot in the earth. If they roll down their windows, they say they hear it: a woman's voice, soft as wind through grass, singing the same ancient tune, Miriam's lullaby. It has now been more than 170 years since the night Miriam disappeared into the earth. The land that was once Rosewood Plantation remains sealed behind concrete and barbed wire, guarded by fences that hum faintly at dusk, like something alive beneath them. There are no tours, no markers, no memorial plaques, only warning signs that say "Dio Naughty. But that hasn't stopped the stories. Every few years, someone vanishes near those woods. A camper, a hunter, a wanderer chasing curiosity into the mist. And every time the pattern is the same: no footprints, no struggle, just absence. Yet their phones, their cameras, their watches, those are always found, still running, batteries full, screens frozen on static. The authorities dismiss it all. Sinkholes, they say. Unstable ground. But the locals know better. They've seen too much, heard too many things that science can't explain. On certain nights, especially the nights after heavy rain, the earth near the fence seems to breathe. The air grows thick with the scent of magnolia and iron. The wind goes still, and somewhere in that silence, from the deep dark center of the field, a voice begins to hum. It's never loud, it's never angry, it's patient, soft, endless. The kind of song that doesn't demand to be heard, only remembered. Old-timers in Chatham County say it's not a haunting at all. It's a keeping. Miriam's keeping. The woman who was mocked, rejected, abandoned, but who found her power not in vengeance, but in remembrance. She didn't curse the ground. She sanctified it. She made it sacred. A grave for every forgotten soul. A name for every voice that history tried to bury. The weeping ground isn't a warning, it's a promise. That the past never stays silent. That every cruelty carved into this soil will one day speak again, until justice and memory are the same breath. They say if you stand by the fence long enough and close your eyes, you can hear it clearly, not just Miriam's voice, but 1,000 others behind her. Men, women, children, singing, whispering, praying, not in anger, but in peace. And if you're patient, if you really listen, you'll hear them speak your name too. Not to claim you, not to harm you, but to remind you that every story, no matter how buried, finds its way back to light. Because memory isn't what haunts the living, it's what keeps them human. So when you pass through Chatham County and the night grows too quiet, and the fog drifts low across the road, roll your windows down. Listen, you might hear the hum. You might feel the ground pulse softly beneath your feet. And you might understand, if only for a heartbeat, why some places refuse to die. Because some names were never meant to be forgotten. And one voice still sings for all of them, Miriam.